Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents When the Viscount Wanted Me, by Lydia Lloyd. Narrated by Christy Woods. Volume the First. Chapter 1. London, England. Late April, 1819. Lord Hugh Aldershot, Viscount of Tremberley, wasn't lonely. It wasn't loneliness that drove him from his residence and into a gentleman's club that before tonight he had hardly remembered belonging to. It certainly wasn't loneliness that led him to indulge in not one or two but 4 tumblers of Scotch, itself not a rarity, after all. And it definitely wasn't loneliness that caused him to stare out the broad window of the club with an expression that might look, to a mistaken passer-by, quite melancholy. After all, he couldn't be lonely. He had his best friends, the rank rakes, his set since Eton, whom he saw more days than not. He had invitations to all the best balls and soirees happening this very evening, at the height of the London season, a privilege that many would, no exaggeration, kill for. Not to mention, he could have chosen to pass time with one of the demi-mondaines, currently renowned for their beauty. Or take a tumble with a comely lady, of any class. Yes, the latter amusements were more the respective purviews of the Marquis of Leith and the Earl of Montaigne, 2 of his best friends, who had very particular penchants for the type of women that they liked to bed. He himself didn't need to pursue a new courtesan every fortnight, or find a fetching chambermaid around every corner, but he certainly could have, and had done. No, most of all, he couldn't be lonely, because he could always do what he liked most for pleasure and a warm bed. Find a ravishing woman in interesting circumstances, his friends would say complicated, and embark on a 2-month affair that led him, at its end, sated in a way that he could not quite capture in words. And yet he found himself staring out the window of what he supposed was his club, after all, and feeling for the first time in his life, at the age of 32, a bit at sea. He knew what the problem was, of course. He just didn't like to admit it. He was happy for John, and he adored Catherine. The Duke and Duchess of Eddington seemed to have unlocked the secret to matrimonial bliss. He teased them about their joy. He told them they should sell viewings of their connubial happiness to society mammas with wayward titled sons who shunned marriage. The young saplings would have breakfast with John and Catherine, and be convinced that they had better marry. Their felicity could make a fellow feel a bit de trop, that was all. But it wasn't their fault. They did everything they could not to make him and Leith and Montaigne feel that way. Still, he couldn't deny that things were different now than they had been, and it wasn't the same sort of change for Monty and Leith, because they still had each other. They were all best mates, but he and John had always been a bit closer, and Montaigne and Leith had their own special bond. But now John had a whole new life, a bigger life. It wasn't that Trem was jealous, or wanted more attention from his best friend. It just meant that on nights like this one, when he didn't particularly feel like entering into a complicated liaison, or going to a ball, or even seeing Montaigne and Leith, he wasn't sure what to do with himself. Lost in these reflections, Trem did not at first pay heed to the strange sounds coming from the other end of the club sitting-room. Finally, however, the noise had grown loud enough that he was forced to look in their direction. They were coming from the back corner, an area partially obscured by a row of armchairs. At first he did not recognize the unfamiliar sounds, and then he realized what they were. They were the sounds of a grown man, sobbing, fairly blubbering, actually, Smirking, he leaned in and tuned his ears to the noise.
"She doesn't love me,"
the man said, his aristocrat tones slurred by drink. "Come now," said another, much more sober-sounding man, who Trem recognised as the Baron of Trent, a nice fellow, at least half a decade younger than himself, whom he remembered from school. "Why don't you take a rest? Just close your eyes."
"Can't. Must reach her. You don't understand, Trent," the other man continued. "She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen."
Trem stifled a laugh, wondering what dangerous woman of the demi-monde had reduced this young lordling, whoever he was, to such a state of idiocy. "I'm sure you'll prevail eventually, mate," said the other man, irritation lacing his voice. "She'll come round."
"No,"
the other answered, his voice sounding quite young.
"I've sent her so many letters. Doesn't respond. Doesn't want to see me. If the Duke knew, he'd kill me."
Trem's pulse spiked. Dear God, were they talking about a gentlewoman, a lady of the ton? What duchess had tarried with this young lackwit? Trent laughed. If her brother knew, he'd make her marry you. Holy hell, they were talking about a gentlewoman, and not a duchess, but a duke's sister. Who was it? He leaned in to hear more. It could be only a small number of women, but no likely candidates sprang to his mind. If he had known his club would always have this much fresh society intelligence, which, he had to admit, he had always liked more than he should, he might have begun frequenting it earlier than tonight. He had to know the identity of the drunken, jilted man. Trem peered over the armchair that blocked his view of the men, and saw that the speaker was the Earl of Hartley. He looked very deep in his cups indeed.
"Can't,"
Hartley groaned.
"Want her to marry me. Want her to choose me."
Trem snorted. The Earl of Hartley had been known for some years now as one of the best catches for young debutantes, despite the rumours that still swelled, after his inheritance of the title, that he wasn't his father's son. He imagined several disappointed ladies would take pleasure in the young lord's pain at present. Despite his princely looks and good title, Trem had always found Hartley a bit juvenile. And it wasn't that he had particularly high standards. Montaigne, after all, was one of his best friends. In short, Trem wasn't surprised that he would be whinging about a woman, given that he had a rather whinging personality. It was surprising, however, that the woman would be a lady. Trem leaned in so as to not miss anything else. What woman of the ton had Hartley compromised?
"Best woman I've ever had. So sweet."
Hartley continued to slur, seeming only half aware of Trent.
"Best face. Best arse."
Trem stifled another laugh at this pathetic description. "Heart," Trent said, no longer trying to hide his irritation. "Sleep it off."
"You have to find her,"
Hartley said, now sounding more agitated than foggy.
"Take this note to her. Make her see me. Grosvenor Square. Breminster House."
Trem's blood ran cold. The smile snapped off his face. Because only one duke's sister lived at Breminster House, and he knew her very well. She was the younger sister of his best friend. It couldn't be. No, it must be someone else.
"Henrietta! Henrietta!"
Hartley began moaning, as if he were trying to speak to the lady in question himself, as if she were there in the room with them. Henrietta. Henrietta Breminster, his best friend's younger sister, practically his younger sister, had thrown the ton into a frenzy from the moment she had debuted. He remembered her when she was an innocent country girl who had never seen London, but it felt like an age since she had been that girl, much longer than 3 or 4 years. Because in that time, she had become the jewel of London society. He could hardly believe it at times, how she had changed. At almost 22, she was one of the most beautiful and sought-after young women between Park Lane and Regent Street. Her ascent made sense, of course. He knew that. Really, he shouldn't have been surprised. She was the sister of a duke, and she had a notoriously enormous dowry. And John and Catherine had themselves gone from potential pariahs for their union to the centre of the ton after their marriage. They hadn't sought it out, but high society had gone wild for their story. After their wedding, their popularity had soared. Now there was no family more fashionable than the Breminsters. Their prominence was only enhanced by their own indifference to it. Well, Henrietta wasn't quite indifferent to it. He knew she cared, at least a bit. What girl of her age and station wouldn't? In the past, Trem had always laughed when he saw little Henrietta making high society bend to her will. He knew from John that quite a few gentlemen had already asked for her hand, but she hadn't wanted any of them. It had pleased him, that knowledge, unaccountably. It was true that if she married, it would be another change. She certainly wouldn't be little Henrietta any more if she became some aristocrat's new wife. Of course, she was still changed, whether she was single or married. He had seen her last week at the Countess of Whitmore's ball, and even he, who knew her so well, had been taken aback by her mature beauty. Her light brown hair, which seemed to shift a shade each time he saw her, flittering lighter and darker, playing tricks with her pale skin, had been done up in an elaborate coiffure. Her slim, elegant figure had attracted every eye. Her delicate features, doll-like in their prettiness, created an intoxicating contrast to her knowing, fun-seeking gaze. Not that she had any sort of effect on him personally. Any man would notice such obvious charms. "Go to sleep, mate," Trent said again, and his voice broke Trem's reverie and brought him back to the present moment.
"Henrietta,"
Hartley responded, his voice sounding fainter, but no less like a whine. Trem sighed. In this situation, only one action lay available to him. Whatever the Earl of Hartley thought had happened between him and Henrietta Breminster, it needed to be resolved now. He couldn't leave when this fool was blubbering madness in the premier gentlemen's club in England, and risking the reputation of his best friend's younger sister with every word he spoke. Who else might overhear these falsehoods? "I advise you to stopper your mouth at once, Hartley." Trem had crossed the room to the two men. Only one set of eyes met his own, however. The Earl of Hartley had passed out cold, and now snored softly in his armchair. His face appeared a pasty, alcohol-blanched mask. Grabbing him by the throat, which had seemed so tempting a few seconds ago, was now pointless. Still, he itched with the desire to throttle the man. How dare he claim to have touched Henrietta? He shouldn't even be allowed to think of her. Trent gaped up at him. Trem knew he and his friends cut quite a figure among the young lords of London. Still, it didn't make his mood less brutal. "How can you let him carry on in this way?" he snapped at Trent. "Anyone might hear him." "I "I'm sorry, Trem, really," the younger man said, his complexion turning pallid with fear. "When I arrived here, he was in this state." "It's Tremberley to you?" He knew his quarrel wasn't with Drent, yet he needed to vent his anger somehow. "I told him to have a care," Drent spluttered, "but I can't help it. He's mad with love for her." "All the more reason why he should not impugn her honour with these falsehoods." "They're not falsehoods. If Eddington knew, he'd give his sister a choice between marriage to Hartley or the convent." Tremberley sized up Drent. He had known Drent a long while, and never taken him for a liar. Still, he couldn't believe that Henrietta would do something so foolish as to lose her virtue to a bit of aristocratic tinsel like Hartley. Unless she loved him, which, to hear Hartley tell it, didn't seem at all the case. He knew what he had to do. Trem kicked Hartley on the shin, hard, but he merely grunted in his sleep. Good, he thought. It was better this way. "Grab his other arm, Drent," he said, hoisting Hartley up on one side. "We're going to Breminster House. Now." Chapter 2. Lady Henrietta Breminster looked at the letter before her and groaned out loud. In the last 2.5 weeks, since the night of the Countess of Whitmore's ball, the Earl of Hartley had sent her exactly 20 missives. They totted up in a line on her desk, every wax crest shining in the candlelight. Each looked more pathetic, and had been less desired than the last. Why, oh why, wouldn't the man leave her alone? He was going to ruin her, or worse, succeed in marrying her. She had managed to keep him from approaching her brother. It had taken several skilful responses from her, and one quite unpleasant Hyde Park rendezvous, to convince Justin not to go to John directly. If she had known becoming intimate with Justin would have these consequences, she would never have done it. Never. Even now she couldn't believe her stupidity. Henrietta pressed the heels of her palms into her eyes. Damn him. She should have heeded the advice of her best friend, Miss Cassandra Seymour, who insisted that Justin had fallen in love with her. She hadn't believed her. It had seemed so unlikely, and so inconvenient. And he had betrayed no signs of loving her. At least, not before. Before a week ago, before the Whitmore ball, she and Justin had just been good friends. When anyone had suggested the prospect of a romance between them, they had both laughed. Of course, Justin had never hid his interest in bedding her. When they had met at parties or ridden in the park, he had been frank in his admiration, but he never paired his overtures with any serious intentions. He had presented anything that might happen between them as light and fun, pleasure without consequences, a secret between two friends. And Justin was handsome, of course. She had been curious what passion would feel like, and Justin had offered himself for her experimentation. She had enjoyed herself with him, even if that night hadn't changed her feelings about the man himself. It was only afterwards, when Justin's demeanour towards her had so completely altered, that she had realised the calamity of her decision. It was all the more painful because they had been such good friends. At one point in time, she had felt that Justin was the only person who fully understood her, because he was also plagued by rumours of illegitimacy. When his father had died, his uncle had tried to take the title by alleging that his mother had married the late Earl when she was already with child, and that therefore Justin wasn't really his father's son. The accusations had gotten his uncle nowhere. His father had always owned Justin, and Parliament ruled that a man usually knew better than his brother whether a child was his. But the rumours still gnawed at him, particularly since his mother had died some years before. Justin felt that there was no one left from whom he could ask the truth. And who to better understand these feelings than Henrietta? Everyone had always said the same about her. The gossips claimed that her father hadn't been the late Duke of Eddington, but the Baron of Eastwick. The Baron had been the man her supposed mother had run off with, after her father had been very publicly caught tupping his mistress, Mary Forster. Her brother had well and killed those rumours 4 years ago, right before her debut, which was very helpful, because as they had discovered around the same time, the rumours were true, just not in the way that everyone expected. Mary Forster had been a gentlewoman from the neighbouring estate. In fact, as it so happened, she was aunt to John's wife, Henrietta's sister-in-law, Catherine. And Mary Forster was also, as they had discovered, Henrietta's natural mother. 22 years ago, her father had gotten her with child, and then, when John's mother and her babe had died in childbirth, he had passed Henrietta off as that child. She was a Breminster, just not a legitimate one. Thank the Lord she had stopped short of telling Justin that full truth. A small but significant blessing now. She had only lost her virtue to him. Hardly what most ladies could pass off to themselves as honour, but she was still thankful for that sliver of dignity. She hadn't been that stupid, just reckless, like her mother and father before her. Henrietta groaned aloud again. Her brother would be devastated if he found out what she had done. He had gone to great lengths to keep her parentage secret, and now for her to throw away her reputation on nothing. She felt like the worst younger sister that had ever walked the earth. She might feel less guilty if her brother were the type to force her into marriage with Hartley, if he were the type to sentence her to the wrong marriage for her crime. She could rail against his lack of respect for her autonomy. But John would never make her marry a man against her will. He would be horrified by her actions, shocked by her recklessness. But he would keep protecting her, and he wouldn't compel her to do anything contrary to her wishes, even if it blighted his own position and tainted the future of their family, the futures of his children. He would keep protecting her. And that would be the worst of it, because she wouldn't deserve his protection, nor his mercy or his kindness, or Catherine's. And yet they would extend it to her anyway. When she thought of John finding out what she had done, her shoulders slumped, and she felt like weeping. Her brother had trusted her. He had once been so resolute in trying to shield her from everything, but after what had happened in the wake of their father's death, when the secret of her parentage had come out, he had resolved to be open with her, to trust that she could handle difficult things. When he found out the truth, the secret that made her success in society feel at times like a great ruse, John could have hidden it from her. But he didn't. He had been honest with her. At this thought, Henrietta felt her eyes well with tears. If that wasn't bad enough, and it was, in her estimation, more than bad enough, she had also risked everything that she and her best friend Cassandra had been working for in the past year. The editor of the ladies' magazine was soon to retire, and they had been lobbying its owner, publishing magnate Mr. Redmond, to make them the new editors. She and Cassandra had dreams for the magazine. It was already a publication which addressed women on the subject of literature, art, and fashion, and they yearned to add a little politics to the magazine, a topic which had hitherto been largely neglected by its current editors as unsuitable for ladies. They had almost convinced Mr. Redmond to agree. But he would never hand over the reins. if Henrietta disgraced herself? Mr. Redmond wanted to make his way into high society, and he couldn't do that if he put a scandalous lady at the helm of one of his periodicals. And even Henrietta could see that a disgraced editor would have little use to a publication as respectable as the Ladies' Magazine. Just like John, Cassandra wouldn't turn her back on her in the event of her disgrace. She would lose the opportunity that she had worked for, and still call Henrietta her best friend. She wouldn't even blame her. She would blame society, the world, the strictures on women. Even if her association with Henrietta made her life harder, she wouldn't abandon her. It would be more forgiveness that she didn't deserve. The truth was that, at the age of almost 22, she, Henrietta Breminster, had succeeded in risking everything that she cared about on a whim. All for an experience that, while perfectly enjoyable, had been ultimately as forgettable as a sack of Cheapside bonbons. Panic filled her chest at this accounting. Perhaps she should just marry Justin. She liked him, and she had passed a pleasurable evening with him, even if the thought of him didn't drive her wild. No, a little voice inside of her protested. She felt a grinding dread at the prospect. She couldn't marry Justin. She didn't want to. She refused. Especially not when she had always thought she would marry someone else. Or rather, 3 someone elses. Well, of course, not all 3 of them, but one of the 3. One of her brother's best friends. One of the rank rakes. She had loved them since she was a girl, and had silently debated to herself for years which would be her future husband. Of course, it was probably wanton thoughts like these ones that had led her down the path to this moment. Many would say that there was something inherently sinful in her nature if, as a mere girl, she had debated to herself which of 3 handsome men she would claim as her own. And yet she had never been able to help conjecturing on this score. Would she leg-shackle the Earl of Montaigne, with his golden blonde hair and sky-blue eyes? His smile the type that made a lady swoon. She had seen it happen. Lady Pomeroy at the Darlingtons' Venetian breakfast. She had gone straight to the bottom of a pond. She had taken down a candelabra with her. Or would she take Leith to husband, the man who cared about rules but couldn't help breaking them, with brown eyes the warm colour of whiskey, and who carried himself with such proper confidence that she did not believe that she had ever seen him blush, who, according to report, was the type to fret about the low cut of a lady's gown on the way to a ball, and then avail himself of that same scandalous bodice on the carriage ride home. Or would she marry Tremberley, her brother's closest friend, who had hoisted her onto his shoulders when she got tired of walking in the fields near Eddington? The one who had escorted her to her first ever opera, with chaperones, of course, and held her hand ever so briefly when she thought her strength might fail her. The one famous for his convoluted love affairs that scandalized society, and who, she knew, had fought in at least 2 duels, who loved gossip so much that her brother teased him about being a fishwife, and who sometimes, when you caught him from just the right angle, had such melancholy in his hazel eyes that it made you want to find something, anything, that would ease his troubles. Henrietta clenched her eyes closed, and wondered what Trem would think if he knew about what she had done with Justin. There was no use wondering. She already knew the answer. He would be horrified, just like her brother, just like Catherine, just like everyone else. She opened her eyes, resolved to somehow, some way, solve this problem, without having to marry Justin. Her gaze fell on the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?